everybody, welcome back. It's Justy, and we're in kind of a strange location. It is still very difficult to film in my room due to my at-home setup because of the social distancing. So we're trying out new things until I figure out what to do up there. Plus, I did not want to bring my mannequin all the way upstairs, so I thought, why not sew in my sweet corner? Today I've come to talk about Hey Cut Sew, a pattern company that I said I had purchased from in my Katsukan haul. I had never had anything by them, never used any of their patterns, and I thought it would be interesting to very quickly put something together and see actually how it worked. And I also very quickly put this together because I wanted a Kristoff outfit. So, two birds, one stone. So that's what we're going to do today, a review of the pattern that I just made. I have not used any other cut sew patterns before. This is it. So anything I say is about this pattern in specific, unless these things carry across multiple patterns. I don't know because I haven't used them yet. And just about the company in general, I guess. I don't know. We'll see what I have to say. So I made this cute little Kristoff outfit that I have a whole thing planned for. Some stuff is coming. It's not quite finished in that I have a little patch of Kristoff coming to put right here on the pocket, but as far as using the pattern, it's done, so we can talk about it. This is the pattern I used. It is number 34. I don't think it has like a name for the specific, oh yeah, it's called Bear Pinafore, number 34. This is it. Obviously the little pocket is supposed to be like a whole bear, but I decided it would be much cuter to put a little Kristoff on there, and the bear would not match this theme. I thought about for a few moments making like it into a reindeer, but I like putting a little patch on it. Much better. My notes, which funny enough are in a bear book, and this was supposed to be a bear. So thank you, Anya, for the cute bear book, for the notes on this very important project. First off, the pattern paper in here is just regular printer paper, which I am not very familiar with using. I generally use commercial patterns, which are tissue paper. The only other time I have not used a commercial pattern was for Anna from Frozen 2, which you can actually see piles of work back here for. And I had to translate that into tissue paper anyways for reasons. So this was my first time 100% using printer paper. It's much harder to rip, which is an upside of that. I thought it was going to be difficult to pin to the fabric, like the pins wouldn't go through it and it would cause me a bunch of problems. And it was actually super easy, about as easy as getting through tissue paper without all the fear of it ripping. So that was a definite bonus and plus for this pattern. So no issues with it being printer paper. I personally do still prefer tissue paper. I think that's just because it's what I'm used to, but this is not a bad thing. I cut everything out at one size, so it's hard to show you, but the lines for the different sizes on this are a little hard to differentiate between. It's just 3 different grays. It's not impossible, it's doable. It's just definitely not the easiest setup. I would recommend maybe some different lines and stuff. That little baggie does not come with the instructions inside. Personally, is a bit of a negative for me. You have to go online and follow the instructions online, which not the biggest fan of. I had to have them on my computer, so I was switching back and forth between what I was watching and the instructions. I much prefer a physical copy of the instructions. But I can admit that doing it this way, one, probably saves a lot of trees because this paper is thicker than your average tissue paper, and it doesn't get everything quite as close as you find in commercial patterns, so I think it would probably require more paper. And two, it probably reduces the price of the pattern a little bit because you're not having to pay for that extra paper, right? They don't have to incur that in their manufacturing costs. And obviously there are still instructions to use, which is great. I'm an instruction person. I do know how to do certain things without them, but man, do I love following a pattern's instructions, so that's what I do. A huge negative for me is the pattern does not have any markings whatsoever. It gives you your grain line, it tells you what it is, tells you how much to cut out, that's great. So this is the bib. I'm showing it because it's a square. I don't want to give away their pattern pieces without you purchasing it if you want to make this. But if you look, there's absolutely no additional markings for where the straps are going to line up, where it's going to line up on here, where to place the pocket, no triangles, no notches, no circles, no nothing. There is not a single notch on any pattern piece. That actually makes it extremely difficult when it comes to certain parts, especially, we'll talk about it more, but trying to figure out where these were gonna go. It just says, I can't remember the exact measurements, but it tells you a certain amount away from the center, but my center had to move anyway because of other things that were to do with the pattern. So my highest recommendation, if they don't have it in their other ones, is to get notches and markings on your patterns, especially because these are designed for new people, obviously, and they're really going to need them. The last kind of thing that I noticed while cutting it out is because the paper is printer paper and it's thicker than your average tissue paper, it is actually harder to line up the grain line with what you're doing because you can't see through. I kind of would have to lay my piece on and line it up, the grain line, with the closest kind of Kristoff up here, and then the closest Kristoff down here to try and get a grain line. If you didn't have a pattern to kind of follow, that would be even harder. And I can't imagine trying to use that grain line on like stripes or dots where you kind of need to be perfect. So that is a negative to the printer paper thing. Definitely still doable, just not as easy as using tissue paper. So if you're not super comfortable lining up grain lines now, I would not recommend jumping to one of these right away because it's going to give you a headache. So because these are designed for beginners, the step-by-step instructions on the internet are super detailed, which is probably another reason it's not actually printed on paper. There's way more in them than you would find in a traditional commercial pattern. They explain terms, they break down steps really finely, so I think that's awesome for somebody who is learning. If you're new, like, this is going to explain things to you that no other pattern will explain to you, and that is a real bonus to these that I think is great, and I just smacked my dress for no reason. Now there was one thing that almost got me about this, but I realized what it is. This pattern does tell you to finish seams and edges, which is awesome. Most patterns don't actually give that as a step to you, so a lot of people don't do it. But the way to finish is using pinking shears, which is, if you don't know, the ones that like make little triangles that stop things from fraying, which I thought was super weird and almost lost me. But I realized, again, this is designed for somebody newer, and somebody newer might not have a serger. That's definitely something I didn't get till quite along in my cosplay. And pinking shears are definitely going to do better than zigzag stitching along an edge. It's never quite perfect, and it's just a pain in the butt. So I actually kind of flipped that around in my brain when I realized that, and was like, oh, this is actually a good thing. One, it's telling people to finish, unlike other patterns, and it's giving them a way to finish in case they don't have a serger to do it properly. So that is actually awesome, and I will give them points for that. I think that's great. I personally did not use pinking shears. I serged everything that needed to be serged, and otherwise, you know, things that are lined here, you didn't have to. But I don't own a pair of pinking shears, so that certainly wasn't happening. This next one, I'll start off as a positive. It has seam allowances, which is great. The Anna pattern that I used did not have any, so the reason I had to translate it to tissue paper is I was adding seam allowances for every single pattern piece, because I'm an idiot and I am not going to remember if I just pin the paper directly to fabric, and then everything's going to be too small. So I had to add them in. So I'm very happy this gives seam allowances. That's excellent. There's no way a beginner is going to know how to add in seam allowances everywhere. There's certain rules to it, so that's super awesome. The weird negative-ish part is they're very weird seam allowances, and they're not consistent. So the bib, when I was sewing the two pieces together, it was instructed that I sew 1/4 in from the edge, and that was its seam allowance, which is very small. But I did it, and I just figured that was going to be the seam throughout the whole thing. But when you come down to the skirt, it tells you to sew it at a 1/2 seam. So I don't like that inconsistency. If somebody wasn't paying too close attention and assumed all the seams were going to be in the same, like most patterns, that could cause them some problems. And I don't see why you need to have different seams. That really doesn't make sense to me. You should be making your patterns, I think, to have consistent seams. It's not like a deal breaker. As long as you're reading carefully and paying attention, you'll be fine. But I definitely did not like that. The next bit was the zipper, which I have in the side here. I really couldn't tell based on the pattern if it was supposed to be on the side or on the back, which is a weird thing, but whatever, maybe I'm just an idiot who can't read. You may also notice my waistband is a little weird here. We will get to why in a minute, but it's good enough for me. It's going to do its job. They have you do the zipper the really weird way where you actually close up the entire seam, and then you sew it onto the seam and then stitch rip where the zipper is out to kind of finish at this. It does call for an invisible zipper. I did not have an invisible zipper, and I am currently under quarantine, so I was not going to get one. So I just use a regular zipper. I don't really care that you can see it. It doesn't look that bad to me. Whatever. I suppose this way of putting a zipper in is a little bit easier for someone who's quite new. It helps you get it perfectly in the center of the seam. I'll give it that. One thing I didn't like is it doesn't actually tell you to baste where the zipper is going to go. It doesn't warn you, so you just stitch it closed, making stitch ripping it to get the zipper out more of a pain than it should be. They really should be telling you to baste for the length of the zipper and then regular stitch for the rest. And because the seams are so small, only 1/2 inch, when you put this in, it's right on the edge of your seam, so if you don't get this perfect, it's gonna not be great, and that's a huge pain in the butt. It also, from the way that I read it, wanted me to do this stitching all the way to the front, so you would have top stitching showing on the actual skirt where you put in your zipper. I do not like that at all. I wanted to avoid as much top stitching as possible because there really isn't a lot on this outfit. So I did it the difficult way and only stitched it to the actual seam itself, not to the front. And it holds in great and has no problems and doesn't have weird top stitching. Because if you're new, which again, what this pattern is keeping in mind, you're probably not the strongest at top stitching. It's not super easy to get it perfectly even, especially when you're brand new. So I don't recommend having unnecessary top stitching if you don't need it. But if you want to do it, please live your best life. I just was not going to. I hate top stitching. When you get to the skirt, gathering it, it only tells you to do 1 gathering line instead of 2, which is strange to me. It generally should have 2. But it's probably also because their seams are so small that an additional line is going to show through, which is what happened to me because I did the 2 lines. And then obviously one was completely showing once I put the waistband on and I had to rip that out. So that's annoying. I still recommend 2 lines. I've used to use 1 and it doesn't go well. It's not great. Another thing that I did notice that is a positive is it encourages you to iron open your seams and explains why you're ironing opening your seams. A lot of people skip this step. I know I definitely did when I was a brand new person. It was just, you know, extra minutes that could be spent sewing the next piece together. You definitely want to iron your seams and listen to the pattern when it tells you why. It's worth the few extra minutes. Iron your seams. So good job, Cutsew, telling people to do that. They give you the extra detailed instruction about ironing your seams, but do not give you instructions about cutting away your corners, which is strange to me. Inside, when you're doing things like the bib, where there's a tight corner here, or this whole strap, the corner is down here, the curve here, there's absolutely no instructions to trim away or make any sort of notches, which, let me tell you, when you first flip this inside, or right side out, I guess, technically, and you haven't cut away those corners, you're going to get puffy, you're not going to get a clean corner, and I'll tell you, this looked horrific. So please trim your seams when you're doing stuff like that. It really should have given that as a step, especially since it's trying to be so detailed. I'm not sure why that wasn't there. So I wasn't pleased that that wasn't in the pattern. The waistband instructions, once you're attaching the skirt to the waistband, not when you're building the waistband, are weird and not great. I think they're one of the worst parts of the pattern, honestly. So it tells you to gather the skirt a little. No real measurement or any way to tell what a little actually is. So you kind of have to guess. Normally, that is a fine thing because you gather it to match your waistband. That's how much you gather it so it fits. Makes sense. Except the pattern tells you that where your 2 waistbands meet at the zipper, there is supposed to be an overlap. It tells you it should like come to something like this or whatever. It does not tell you how much that overlap should be though. It just says there should be an overlap. So again, you're back to guessing. How much do I gather? Do I gather more? Do I gather less? How far should the overlap be? If they're gonna have you do that, they should be giving specific instructions. This is also where I noticed that their sizing is not great. I make stuff for myself all the time. I know exactly what my measurements are. I know what size I am in a regular pattern, so I'm very familiar with that. They have a tool on their website where you put your measurements in and it tells you what size of the pattern you should be making. Great. Mine gave me medium, which made sense to me. I wear a lot of medium clothes, so that's what I started off. When I hit the waistband, I realized that was absolutely incorrect, and like very incorrect. If I had this overlapping, there is absolutely no way I could get this on. Even at this, with it perfectly separate and a bit of space here, this skirt is definitely a little too tight for me, which is not ideal. I mean, I guess they're encouraging me to finally start losing that weight that I want to lose, but that makes me very nervous. I don't know what their sizing is like for other patterns, but the fact that it was so off, even though I gave them my exact measurements, makes me wary. But I at least got it to a place where I can wear it. I just didn't do the overlap. I put a hook and eye up here. There'll be, again, this little gap, but I'm going to be wearing a shirt with this, so you're really not going to notice it. But be careful with that, please. And if they're going to have you do overlaps, if they're going to have you do gathers, there really should be specific instructions for how much you should be doing. Otherwise, you're literally just guessing, and you could end up with issues later, especially because they're not giving you notches for how to line up other things on. So if you've changed the way the pattern works, you have to guess at all this, which is really fun. I love that for me. Another thing that I guess technically isn't horrible, but that I didn't like, and I wish they had you do it a different way, is they have you put the pocket on once the whole bib is built, which means that you have stitching on the underside. I at least used the underside, like the tan fabric I was using to put this together, so it's not super visible. But I think it would have been better if they had you attach the pocket to this front bib and then attach the bib to the secondary back piece. There would be no stitching then. It would be a lot cleaner. Not a super deal breaker. I mean, the pocket still obviously works, but knowing that that's the instructions next time, that is how I will build it. I was completely following their instructions one by one. I didn't read ahead, so this is just what it was when I came to it. And again, there's no notches, so you kind of gotta guess where it goes on the front. Mine is not perfectly centered because I'm terrible at things like that. And they have you fold under to hide the seam, which was a pain. It kept wiggling around. So this is as good as it got, and I still like it, so whatever. I don't know. It's possible that putting it on like this makes it stronger because it's, you know, it's sewn to also the piece with the interfacing. I don't know that for sure, but there it is. Because there's no notches, putting these on were very interesting. I had to work with my roommate to figure this out, and I had changed the side anyway, so their stuff wouldn't have worked for me. But still, there should be some indicator of where these should be attaching, where the bib should be attaching. They're just like, yeah, you know, in the exact center, figure it out. And I'm like, okay, well, notch things for me. Again, there's also no instruction for how far in it should be. It says just past the waistband or something like that, just in. And I'm like, that's not a measurement. That's not an exact thing. Sewing needs to be pretty exact. Tell me exactly where you want it to go. But clearly you can figure it out. It's just a pain in the butt. It just top stitches on there, and the straps also just get top stitched on here too. Not my favorite thing, but whatever. And then there it is. You're at the completed dress. It has you do at least a double rolled hem to hide your edge. I serged, so I was too lazy and I just did one hem. Good enough for me. I'm not putting it on in this video because I have, like I said, a very specific outfit plan for this when I finally truly unveil it. But you get the general idea on at least this sort of mannequin, which is close enough to my size. So that's my official review of cut sew in general and pattern 34. It's not the worst pattern I've ever used. I definitely think there's improvements they could make if they want to get bigger and better. I mean, I'm not a business person. I'm also not an expert sewer. These are just things that I've noticed that I think would work much better in their patterns. Not that cut sew cares what my opinion is, but whatever. And again, I have not used any other patterns yet, so I don't know how consistent the things that I've said are across all of them. I do have the other one that I bought, and I will eventually get to making that, and we'll see how it goes. But for now, with just having made this one, I definitely say this is like a mediocre pattern company. They're not horrific. They make pretty cute stuff. If I was at a convention and they were there, I would maybe buy one or two more. I wouldn't actively seek them out or order online. I don't think it's worth that effort. But I mean, the one big main upside they have is they make stuff that regular commercial patterns are not going to have. So, you know, it's a toss-up. So there we go. My cute review of cut sew and their pattern. I hope you enjoyed hanging out with me in my Kristoff dress. I'm really excited for when all the rest of the pieces arrive and I can do a full proper photo shoot for this outfit. Look out for that. It will be on my Instagram, which is linked below. Let me know if you've used any cut sew patterns and how you feel about them, or if you have any independent pattern companies that you really like, please let me know. I'd love to check them out. I love collecting independent stuff that's very different from commercial. It gets me stuff that I would never have otherwise. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you enjoyed this review. If you have any questions about the cut sew patterns, please let me know. I'll answer whatever I can. And otherwise, I hope everybody has a great day. Bye!